Officer Lucas Carter's shift had been uneventful until the radio crackled with a voice thin and trembling. A child's voice. "Help me," the boy whispered, his words fractured by static. "I'm scared." Lucas's chest tightened. The dispatch details were sparse, pointing to a decrepit neighborhood on the outskirts of town. The caller had hung up abruptly, leaving an ominous silence in his wake. Trusting his instincts, Lucas redirected his route toward the given location, his gut telling him that something was horribly wrong. The sun dipped below the horizon as Lucas parked his patrol car in front of the address. The house loomed like a specter, its wooden panels warped and cracked, paint peeling in long, jagged strips. The lawn was a graveyard of broken toys and overturned flower pots, each object frozen in a tableau of forgotten joy. Lucas scanned the surroundings, his hand instinctively resting on his holstered weapon. The area was eerily quiet, save for the occasional rustle of dry leaves in the autumn breeze. The hairs on the back of his neck prickled as he approached the front door. It creaked open under the lightest push, revealing a dark and cluttered interior. "Police," he called out, his voice firm but cautious. "Is anyone here?" Only silence answered him. The air inside was heavy with the scent of mildew and something more unsettling, an acrid, metallic tang that hinted at violence. As Lucas moved further inside, the evidence of a struggle became apparent. A shattered lamp lay in the hallway, its jagged pieces catching the dim light. A child's backpack was discarded near the stairs, its straps torn as if someone had yanked it forcefully. The walls bore scuffs and faint smears, the kind that made his pulse quicken with dread. A faint sound drew his attention upstairs, a muffled whimper, barely audible. His heartbeat thundered in his ears as he climbed the creaking staircase, each step echoing in the oppressive silence. The sound grew clearer, leading him to a closed door at the end of the hall. "Police," he announced again, his hand tightening around the doorknob. A weak voice called out from the other side. "Help, please." Lucas didn't hesitate. He rammed his shoulder against the door, splintering the frame. The room was dimly lit by the pale glow of a single, cracked window. His gaze landed on a boy, small, frail, and chained to a radiator. The child's wide eyes were filled with terror, but a glimmer of hope flickered as they met Lucas's. The boy whispered one word that made Lucas's blood run cold. "Dad." Lucas froze, the boy's fragile voice reverberating through him like a thunderclap. "Dad," the child repeated, his voice cracking, a mixture of desperation and disbelief. Lucas knelt beside him, his mind racing. The boy's features, though gaunt and pale, were achingly familiar. The same chestnut brown eyes, the same dimpled chin. Memories of laughter and bedtime stories flashed through Lucas's mind like a cruel slideshow. "Matthew?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. The boy nodded weakly, tears spilling down his dirt-streaked cheeks. Lucas's throat tightened as he worked quickly to free him, his hands trembling as he fumbled with the rusted chains. "Hold on, buddy," he murmured, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside him. "I've got you." The chains finally gave way with a metallic clink, and Lucas gently lifted Matthew into his arms. The boy's frail frame felt weightless, a stark contrast to the memories of the vibrant child he once was. "How did you find me?" Matthew asked, his voice barely a whisper. Lucas swallowed hard, his eyes scanning the room for any immediate threats. "I heard your call, but we'll talk later, okay? First, I need to get you out of here." As he carried Matthew down the stairs, Lucas's gaze caught on a shattered picture frame lying among the debris. He froze. The photograph inside showed a younger version of Matthew, sitting on a woman's lap, Lucas's ex-wife, Claire. His breath hitched. This wasn't just a random crime scene. It was a personal nightmare. Once outside, Lucas called for backup and an ambulance, his voice sharp and commanding. The dispatcher's calm tone only heightened the surrealness of the situation. "Help is on the way, Officer Carter," the dispatcher assured him. Matthew clung to Lucas as the sirens approached, his tiny hands gripping his father's uniform like a lifeline. Lucas crouched low, keeping the boy shielded as he surveyed the surroundings. His instincts told him the danger wasn't over. "Matthew," Lucas said softly, Who did this to you? Were there others here? Matthew's eyes darted toward the house, his expression haunted. There were men, but they left when I called. They said they'd come back. Lucas's jaw tightened. He needed answers, but Matthew was too fragile to push further now. The boy's safety came first. When the ambulance arrived, Lucas handed Matthew to the paramedics, his reluctance evident in the way his hands lingered. I'm riding with him, Lucas told them, his tone brooking no argument. As they sped toward the hospital, Lucas sat beside his son, gripping his hand tightly. The boy's words replayed in his mind like a broken record. They said they'd come back. The weight of what he'd stumbled upon began to settle. This wasn't just a child abduction. It was the tip of a far larger and more insidious operation. Lucas silently vowed that whoever was responsible would pay. The hospital's fluorescent lights cast a harsh glow over the emergency room, where Lucas paced back and forth outside Matthew's room. Through the glass, he could see his son lying on the bed, his small frame dwarfed by the medical equipment surrounding him. The boy's face was pale, but his eyes were open, scanning the room as if expecting danger to pounce from the shadows. Officer Carter? The voice of Dr. Evelyn Harper pulled Lucas from his trance. She stood holding a clipboard, her expression grave but compassionate. How is he? Lucas asked, his voice taut with worry. He's stable, but malnourished and dehydrated. There are signs of physical abuse, old bruises, some partially healed fractures. It's going to take time, but he's resilient. He'll recover physically. Lucas felt a knot tighten in his chest. Physically. The implication was clear. The emotional scars would run much deeper. I need to stay with him, Lucas said firmly, his tone leaving no room for argument. Dr. Harper nodded. Of course. But Officer Carter, there's something you should know. Lucas's pulse quickened as the doctor hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Matthew kept asking about his mother. Has he been in contact with her? Lucas's breath caught. He hadn't spoken to Claire in years. After their divorce, they'd taken separate paths, and she'd moved out of state. The last he heard, she was trying to rebuild her life, far removed from their shared pain. No, he replied, his voice strained. Not since before. Dr. Harper's expression darkened. He seems to believe she's the one who left him there. The words hit Lucas like a sledgehammer. What? I can't confirm anything, Dr. Harper said gently, but from the little he said, it seems he was taken from her care. He's confused, but there may be a connection. Lucas's mind reeled. Could Claire have been involved? The thought was unbearable, but the gaps in their shared history left too many unanswered questions. Steeling himself, Lucas entered Matthew's room. The boy turned to him, his wide eyes filled with a mix of fear and relief. Hey, buddy, Lucas said softly, pulling a chair close to the bed. How are you feeling? Matthew hesitated before answering. Tired, but safe. The word safe brought a lump to Lucas's throat. He reached out and gently ruffled Matthew's hair. You're going to stay safe. I promise. Matthew bit his lip, his voice trembling. Will they come back for me? Lucas's jaw tightened. No, not while I'm here. Matthew seemed to take solace in his father's conviction, but his next words shattered the fragile calm. Mom said she'd come back, but she never did. Lucas leaned forward, his voice steady but urgent. Matthew, do you remember what happened before you got to that house? Did you see Mom? Matthew's brow furrowed, his small hands clutching the blanket. There were men. They took me from Mom. She told them it was okay. Lucas's heart sank. The room blurred around him as his son's words painted a picture of betrayal. But was it true? Or was it a distorted memory born of trauma? Matthew, Lucas said gently, do you remember their faces? Anything about them? Matthew nodded. One had a scar. Like this. He traced his finger along his cheek. Lucas's mind locked onto the detail. A lead. It wasn't much, but it was a start. He knew one thing for sure. He couldn't rest until he unraveled the truth. As Matthew drifted into an uneasy sleep, Lucas slipped out of the room, his resolve hardening. The answers were out there, and he wouldn't stop until he found them. Lucas drove through the city streets, his mind spinning as he pieced together fragments of the puzzle. The image of Matthew's frail body and the haunting words about Claire lingered like a shadow. His ex-wife couldn't have willingly handed their son to those monsters, could she? He pulled into the precinct parking lot, the glare of fluorescent lights reflecting off his windshield. Inside, the familiar hum of police radios and chatter filled the air, grounding him in the reality of his mission. "Carter," Sergeant Reed called from his desk, his gruff voice cutting through the noise. "Heard you had a rough night. What's going on?" Lucas approached, dropping the chain he'd recovered from the abandoned house onto the desk. "I found my son, Sarge. He's been missing for years. And now he's tied to something big, human trafficking." Reed's eyes widened, and he leaned forward. "Your son? Jesus, Carter. You sure about this?" Lucas nodded. "He's at the hospital, but I need to move fast. He mentioned a man with a scar who took him. We need to run checks on every known trafficker matching that description." Reed scribbled notes furiously. "I'll get our team on it. You've got my full support, but don't do anything reckless, Lucas. You're too close to this." Lucas barely registered the warning as he turned toward his desk. He powered up his computer, diving into the department's database. Minutes turned into hours as he combed through profiles of known criminals, searching for a face that fit Matthew's description. Finally, an image stopped him cold. A mugshot of a man named Victor Kane, a known enforcer for a trafficking ring that had eluded law enforcement for years. The jagged scar running down Kane's cheek matched Matthew's description perfectly. "Got you," Lucas muttered, his fists clenching. Just as he prepared to relay his findings to Reed, his phone buzzed. "The hospital. Officer Carter, this is Dr. Harper," came the voice on the other end. "Matthew's awake, but he's asking for you. He's frightened." Lucas didn't hesitate. Grabbing his jacket, he rushed back to the hospital. When he entered Matthew's room, he found the boy sitting upright, his eyes darting nervously toward the door. "They're coming," Matthew whispered, clutching the blanket. "I heard them. They're coming to get me." Lucas's heart pounded. "No one's coming, Matthew. You're safe here. I won't let anything happen to you." But Matthew's fear was palpable, and Lucas knew it wasn't baseless. Kane's profile hinted at a man who didn't leave loose ends. If Matthew had seen too much, they wouldn't hesitate to come after him. "Matthew," Lucas said softly, kneeling beside the bed. "I found the man you described. Victor Kane. Do you remember anything else about him? Anything at all?" Matthew hesitated, his small hands trembling. "There was a tattoo, a snake, on his neck." Lucas nodded, absorbing the detail. "That's good, buddy. You're helping a lot." As he reassured Matthew, Lucas's mind churned with possibilities. If Kane was involved, it meant the operation was active and dangerous. The chain of events was accelerating, and Lucas felt the weight of time pressing against him. "Stay with him," Lucas told the nurse as he stepped out of the room. He dialed Reed's number. "We've got a name," Lucas said as soon as Reed picked up. "Victor Kane. Snake tattoo on his neck. I need surveillance on known locations tied to him." Reed didn't hesitate. "I'll get the team on it. But Lucas, don't do this alone. Let us handle it." Lucas ended the call without answering. He couldn't shake the feeling that this fight was personal, and he wasn't going to wait for bureaucracy to catch up. As he walked to his car, his phone buzzed again. A text message with an address. The source was anonymous, but the message was clear. "Looking for answers? Come alone." Lucas's grip tightened around the phone. It was reckless, dangerous, but he couldn't ignore it. The clock was ticking, and the lives of more than just his son could be at stake. The address led Lucas to the industrial outskirts of the city, a desolate area filled with decaying warehouses and rusted machinery. The night air was thick with the scent of oil and decay, the silence broken only by the occasional howl of the wind. Lucas parked his car a block away and approached on foot, his senses heightened and his hand hovering near his weapon. The warehouse loomed ahead, its broken windows glowing faintly from dim lights within. Lucas crouched near the entrance, listening for movement. Low voices filtered through the cracks in the steel doors, and the unmistakable sound of heavy boots echoed inside. The message had been clear, "Come alone," but Lucas had ignored the demand. His radio was on a secure channel, transmitting his location back to the precinct, where a backup team was on standby. He couldn't afford to risk rushing in without a plan. Slipping inside, Lucas stuck to the shadows, his sharp eyes scanning the dimly lit space. Stacked crates and rusting machinery provided cover as he moved closer to the voices. His breath caught as he spotted two men near the center of the room. One of them, tall and muscular with a snake tattoo curling up his neck, matched Matthew's description of Victor Kane. The other man, wiry with darting eyes, was rifling through a duffel bag stuffed with cash and documents. Lucas strained to catch their conversation. "Shipments delayed," the wiry man said, his tone agitated. "The kids' call screwed everything up. Cops are sniffing around." Kane growled, his voice low and menacing. "Doesn't matter. We move tonight. Loose ends first." Lucas's jaw tightened as the implications sank in. This wasn't just about Matthew. There were other victims. The operation was far from over. Before Lucas could retreat to radio in the intel, his foot brushed against a loose metal rod. The clang echoed through the warehouse like a gunshot. "Who's there?" Kane barked, drawing a knife from his belt. The wiry man pulled a gun, his eyes scanning the shadows. Lucas cursed under his breath, ducking behind a stack of crates. His cover was blown. He drew his weapon, his mind racing. This wasn't the time to hesitate. "Police!" he shouted, stepping out with his gun aimed. "Drop your weapons." For a moment, there was silence. Then Kane's lips curled into a snarl. "You shouldn't have come here alone, cop." The wiry man fired, the bullet ricocheting off the metal crate near Lucas's head. Lucas returned fire, forcing them to scatter. He moved quickly, using the chaos to his advantage, but Kane was fast. He disappeared into the shadows, leaving his partner behind. The wiry man fired again, but Lucas closed the gap, knocking the gun from his hand with a swift blow. Lucas pinned him to the ground, cuffing him as the man writhed and cursed. "Where's the rest of the operation?" Lucas demanded, pressing his knee into the man's back. "I don't know." The man spat, his voice frantic. "Kane doesn't tell me everything." "Where is he going?" Lucas barked, tightening his grip. "The docks," the man gasped. "There's a container. He's meeting the buyers there." Lucas's radio crackled as backup arrived, the flashing lights of patrol cars illuminating the warehouse. Reed stepped inside, his gun drawn. "Carter, you okay?" Reed called. "Fine," Lucas replied, standing and hauling the cuffed man to his feet. "But Kane's heading to the docks. He's got other kids. We need to move now." Reed nodded, issuing orders to the team. "You're not going alone this time, Lucas. Let's end this." Lucas handed the cuffed man to another officer and followed Reed out, his mind locked on Kane. The stakes had never been higher, but Lucas wasn't about to let fear slow him down. As they sped toward the docks, Lucas's thoughts returned to Matthew. His son's safety had been the catalyst, but now it was about something bigger, ensuring no other child endured the same nightmare. The docks were a labyrinth of towering containers and creaking cranes, their shadows stretching long under the harsh industrial lights. The salty tang of seawater mingled with the diesel fumes from distant cargo ships. Lucas stepped out of the police cruiser, his weapon drawn and his heart pounding. The team had been briefed. Kane was here, and there was a high likelihood of finding other victims. The precinct had deployed a tactical unit, their black gear blending into the night as they moved into position. Lucas scanned the scene, his eyes locking on a cluster of containers near the water's edge. Dim lights flickered from a makeshift office inside one of them. Men stood outside, armed and alert. His gut told him Kane was there. "Stay sharp," Sergeant Reed said, his voice low. "No heroics, Carter. We move in as a team." Lucas gave a curt nod, but his resolve was unshakable. This wasn't just another operation. This was personal. He moved with the team, their footsteps muffled against the concrete as they approached the target. The first gunshot shattered the tense silence, and all hell broke loose. One of Kane's men had spotted them, raising the alarm. Bullets flew, ricocheting off metal containers as the officers took cover. Lucas pressed his back against a container, his grip on his weapon firm. He could hear Kane barking orders inside the office, his voice rising above the chaos. Lucas signaled to Reed, who nodded and directed a flanking maneuver to cut off their escape. "Move in," Reed ordered, and the team advanced, methodically clearing each container. Lucas pushed forward, his focus narrowing as he approached the office. A flash of movement caught his eye. Kane, slipping out the back with a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. Lucas pursued without hesitation. "Kane!" he shouted, his voice cutting through the cacophony. "You're done. Stop running." Kane didn't stop. Instead, he turned and fired wildly, the bullets sparking against the metal around Lucas. Lucas returned fire, driving Kane toward the edge of the docks. The chase ended abruptly as Kane reached the water, cornered. He turned, his scarred face twisted in a snarl, the duffel bag at his feet. "You should have stayed out of this, cop," Kane spat, his voice venomous. "You don't know who you're dealing with." "I know enough," Lucas said, his weapon trained on Kane. "You're not walking away from this." Kane's gaze darted to the water, then back to Lucas. "You think taking me down will stop this? There's always another snake." Lucas's voice hardened. "Not tonight." Before Kane could react, Lucas lunged, tackling him to the ground. The gun skidded out of Kane's reach as the two men grappled on the wet concrete. Kane was strong, his blows landing heavy, but Lucas fought with the fury of a father who had almost lost everything. Finally, Lucas managed to pin Kane, pressing his knee into the man's back as he cuffed him. "It's over," Lucas said, his voice cold. Behind them, the tactical team secured the area, finding several children huddled inside one of the containers. Their wide eyes and trembling frames told the story of their ordeal, but they were alive, and they were safe now. As Kane was dragged away by officers, Lucas approached the children, his heart heavy yet relieved. One of the younger kids looked up at him, their tear-streaked face filled with fear and hope. "Are you the police?" the child whispered. Lucas knelt, his voice gentle. "Yes. You're safe now. No one's going to hurt you again." The child nodded, clutching Lucas's hand tightly. In that moment, Lucas felt a surge of purpose. This wasn't just about Matthew anymore. This was about every child who had suffered at the hands of monsters like Kane. The precinct buzzed with activity as officers processed the aftermath of the raid. The rescued children were receiving medical attention, and social workers were being called to assist. Victor Kane sat in an interrogation room, his scarred face expressionless, but his eyes glinted with defiance. Lucas stood outside the room, watching through the one-way mirror. His fists clenched at his sides as he replayed Kane's cryptic words at the docks. "You don't know who you're dealing with, Carter." Reed's voice cut through his thoughts. "We've got enough evidence to bury him, but something tells me you're not done." Lucas turned to his sergeant, his jaw tight. "He's just a cog in the machine. We need the names. The people funding this operation." Reed sighed, his shoulders heavy with exhaustion. "You think he's going to talk?" "He will," Lucas said firmly, stepping into the interrogation room. The door closed with a quiet thud, and Lucas sat across from Kane, his gaze unyielding. Kane leaned back in his chair, his smirk oozing arrogance. "So, you're the hero cop," Kane drawled. "Bet it feels good, taking me down. Too bad it won't make a difference." Lucas didn't rise to the bait. "You're facing enough charges to keep you locked away for life. But you give me the names of your contacts, the people higher up, and maybe the DA cuts you a deal." Kane chuckled, the sound low and mocking. "You really think I'm afraid of prison? The people I work for, they're untouchable. You'd be smart to drop this." Lucas slammed his hand on the table, the sound reverberating through the room. "I'm not walking away. You took my son. You hurt him, and you've hurt countless others. So, you can play tough, or you can start talking." Kane's smirk faltered for a moment, replaced by a flicker of something Lucas couldn't quite place. Fear? Recognition? But then it was gone, and Kane leaned forward, his tone chillingly calm. "Your son," he said slowly, "was just the beginning. You think you've saved him, but this doesn't end here. It never does." Lucas's blood ran cold, but he didn't let it show. "We'll see about that." Kane remained silent, his defiance unbroken. Frustrated but undeterred, Lucas left the room, slamming the door behind him. Reed was waiting in the hallway, his expression grim. "Anything?" Reed asked. "Not yet," Lucas admitted. "But he knows something." We just need to find the right leverage. Reed nodded, placing a hand on Lucas's shoulder. We'll get there. But right now, you need to be with your son. Let the rest of us handle this. Lucas hesitated, the weight of the night pressing down on him. Finally, he nodded and left the precinct, his mind still racing. At the hospital, Lucas found Matthew sitting up in bed, a tray of untouched food beside him. The boy's face brightened when he saw his father, but his smile quickly faded. Did you catch him? Matthew asked quietly. Lucas sat beside him, taking his hand. Yes. He won't hurt anyone again. Matthew's gaze dropped to his lap. What about the other men? The ones who took me from Mom? Lucas's heart ached at the question. We're going to find them too, he promised. But right now, I need you to focus on getting better. You're safe, Matthew. I'll make sure of it. Matthew nodded, but the fear in his eyes lingered. Lucas stayed with him until the boy finally drifted into an uneasy sleep. As he watched his son, Lucas felt a renewed sense of purpose. This fight was far from over, but he wouldn't stop until every child trapped in the same nightmare was free. The morning sun filtered through the hospital window, bathing Matthew's room in a soft, golden light. Lucas sat in a chair beside the bed, his eyes heavy with exhaustion but his mind restless. Matthew was still asleep, his chest rising and falling with the steady rhythm of recovery. For the first time in years, Lucas felt an overwhelming need to protect his son, not just physically, but from the scars that ran deeper than the bruises. His phone buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. Reed's name flashed on the screen. Lucas answered quickly, stepping into the hallway to avoid waking Matthew. We found something, Reed said, his voice clipped. Kane wasn't lying about being part of a bigger operation. We traced some of the documents from the raid, bank accounts, coded transactions. There's a pattern. What kind of pattern? Lucas asked, his heart quickening. The funds are funneled through shell companies linked to international buyers, Reed explained. It's a massive network, Carter. And we think there's another location being used as a holding site. Where? Lucas pressed, his tone sharp. An abandoned property near the river, Reed replied. We're gearing up for another raid, but I thought you'd want to know. Lucas nodded, already moving toward the elevator. I'm on my way. As he drove to the precinct, Lucas's thoughts swirled. Every step forward revealed a darker and more sprawling operation than he had imagined. This wasn't just about Matthew. It was about dismantling a machine that thrived on human suffering. At the precinct, Reed met him with a stack of files. You'll want to see this, he said, spreading the documents across the desk. Photographs of shipping containers, transaction records, and a map of the river property painted a grim picture. These containers, Reed said, pointing to one of the photos. They're designed to look like storage units, but they're outfitted to hold people. Lucas's stomach churned. He had seen the horrors of human trafficking before, but knowing that his own son had been one of its victims made the reality hit harder. We move tonight, Reed said, his tone resolute. We're coordinating with Homeland Security to ensure we don't miss anyone. Lucas glanced at the map, his jaw tightening. I want in on the raid. Reed hesitated. Carter, you've been through hell. Are you sure you're ready for this? Lucas's gaze hardened. This isn't just another case, Sarge. I'm not sitting on the sidelines. Reed studied him for a moment before nodding. All right, but you stick to protocol. We're not losing anyone tonight. As the team assembled and reviewed the plan, Lucas felt a mix of dread and determination. The operation was risky, but the stakes were too high to hesitate. They would hit the river property hard and fast, leaving no room for escape. When night fell, Lucas stood with the tactical team at the staging area near the property. The air was cold, the sound of the river faint in the distance. Lucas adjusted his vest, his weapon heavy in his hands. Move out, Reed ordered, and the team advanced. They approached the property in silence, their movements precise and deliberate. Lucas's pulse quickened as they breached the perimeter, spreading out to cover every angle. The first container was empty, but the second one wasn't. Inside, they found a group of children, their eyes wide with fear but alive. Lucas's relief was short-lived as gunfire erupted from the far side of the property. The team ducked for cover, returning fire as shadows darted between the containers. Lucas moved toward the sound, his instincts guiding him. He spotted a figure running toward a waiting vehicle, a man with a familiar snake tattoo on his neck. Kane's accomplice. Lucas sprinted after him, the adrenaline drowning out the chaos around him. "Stop!" Lucas shouted, but the man didn't. Lucas fired, his shot hitting the man's leg and sending him sprawling. Lucas reached him in seconds, pinning him to the ground. "Where's the rest of the network?" Lucas demanded, his voice a growl. The man grimaced, his hand clutching his wounded leg. "You think taking us down will stop it?" he spat. "This isn't the end." "Where?" Lucas barked, shaking him. The man smirked, blood staining his teeth. "You'll never find them all." Lucas cuffed him, dragging him back to the team. The raid was far from over, but for now, the children were safe. As he looked at their tear-streaked faces, Lucas felt the weight of the battle ahead. He had won this round, but the war was far from over. Lucas sat across from Victor Kane's accomplice, his sharp gaze cutting through the man's feigned indifference. The precinct's interrogation room was cold, the air thick with tension as the man leaned back in his chair, nursing the bullet wound in his leg. "I don't have all day," Lucas said, his voice edged with steel. "You're already going away for a long time. But if you give me what I need, locations, names, everything, I might talk to the DA about a deal." The accomplice scoffed, but Lucas could see the crack in his facade. He pressed on. "You've seen what happens when your type gets caught," Lucas continued. "You're disposable to them. You really think they'll lift a finger to save you? Talk now, or they'll forget you ever existed." The man's bravado wavered, his fingers twitching on the edge of the table. Finally, he spoke. "All right," he muttered, his voice low. "But if I go down, I'm not going down alone." Lucas leaned forward, his jaw tight. "Then start talking." Over the next hour, the accomplice unraveled a chilling tale. He detailed the trafficking operation's sprawling network, shell companies, offshore accounts, and corrupt officials on the payroll. He provided addresses for safe houses, holding sites, and the identities of key players who facilitated the network's operations. Lucas didn't flinch, though every word twisted like a knife in his chest. Among the names was one he didn't expect: Claire. She was desperate, the accomplice said with a shrug. Owed money she couldn't pay. Made a deal to clear her debt. That's how they got the kid. Lucas's hands curled into fists under the table. Claire's betrayal hit like a freight train, but he kept his face impassive. He couldn't let personal emotions cloud the moment. "Where's the next shipment?" Lucas demanded, his voice tight. "Tomorrow night," the man replied. "Docks on the west side. Big score. Kids from all over." Lucas stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "We're done here." In the precinct's main room, Sergeant Reed was waiting. Lucas relayed the information, his voice clipped and urgent. "Coordinate with Homeland Security," Lucas ordered. "We hit every address he gave us. And the docks are priority one." Reed nodded, already issuing commands to the team. "And Claire?" he asked cautiously. "I'll handle her," Lucas said, his tone firm. That evening, Lucas stood outside Claire's apartment. The building was run down, its exterior a stark contrast to the suburban home they had once shared. When Claire opened the door, her face paled at the sight of him. "Lucas," she breathed. "Is he? He's safe?" Lucas cut her off, stepping inside. "But we need to talk. Now." Claire's hands trembled as she gestured for him to sit, but Lucas remained standing, his arms crossed. "I know what you did," he said bluntly. "You handed him over to pay off your debts." Tears filled her eyes as she shook her head. "I didn't know they'd take him like that. I thought it was just—" Her voice cracked, and she sank into a chair. "I didn't think they'd hurt him." "You didn't think at all," Lucas snapped. "You gambled with his life, Claire. And you lost." Claire sobbed, her shoulders shaking. "I made a mistake, Lucas. A terrible mistake. I've been living with that guilt every day." Lucas's anger simmered, but he forced himself to focus. "If you want any chance of seeing him again, you'll tell me everything. Names, contacts, every detail about how you got involved." Claire nodded, wiping her tears. "There's a man. His name is Marcus. He arranged everything. I don't know his last name, but he's tied to the docks. He's the one who took Matthew. Lucas's jaw clenched. You're going to the station to give a full statement. If you cooperate, maybe, you'll have a chance at redemption. Claire nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. I'll do whatever it takes. Lucas left without another word, his mind spinning. The pieces were falling into place, but the true battle was just beginning. The West Side docks were a fortress of shadows, towering containers stacked like mazes against the night sky. Lucas stood with his team, his weapon heavy in his hands, his mind laser-focused on the mission ahead. Tonight, everything came to a head. The network that had stolen Matthew, and so many others, would finally fall. Sergeant Reed's voice cut through the tension. Teams are in position. No mistakes, no hesitation. Let's bring them down. Lucas nodded, his jaw clenched. The intel from Kane's accomplice had led them here, and every detail checked out. The children were somewhere in the containers, and the traffickers were preparing for a major shipment. This was their last chance to strike. Move in, Lucas ordered, his voice steady. The task force advanced like shadows, their movements silent and precise. As they breached the perimeter, Lucas's heart pounded in his chest. A faint light flickered near a row of containers, and voices carried on the wind, gruff orders and hurried footsteps. The suspects were preparing to move. Lucas raised his hand, signaling for his team to surround the area. Then, with a swift motion, he and Reed stormed forward, weapons drawn. Police, drop your weapons, Lucas shouted. For a moment, there was chaos. The traffickers scrambled, some reaching for guns, others running toward the darkness. Gunfire erupted, sharp and deafening. Lucas ducked behind a container, returning fire as his team closed in. He spotted Marcus, the man Claire had named, barking orders to the others. Lucas broke from cover, sprinting toward him. Marcus, he yelled, his voice cutting through the chaos. It's over. Marcus turned, his face twisting in rage. He fired, but Lucas was faster. The bullet grazed his shoulder, but he kept moving, tackling Marcus to the ground. They struggled, Marcus fighting with the desperation of a man who knew his freedom was over. But Lucas's fury and determination overwhelmed him. With a final surge of strength, Lucas pinned Marcus, cuffing him as the rest of the team secured the area. You're done, Lucas growled. Every last one of you. Nearby, the tactical team opened one of the locked containers. Inside were several children, their faces pale and tear-streaked. Lucas's chest tightened at the sight, but relief flooded him. They were alive. The operation continued through the night, every suspect captured, every victim rescued. By dawn, the docks were silent, save for the hum of police radios and the quiet sobs of the rescued children. Days later, Lucas sat in a courtroom, watching as Victor Kane and his accomplices were sentenced. The evidence was overwhelming, their guilt undeniable. When the judge handed down life sentences for each of them, Lucas felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Justice had been served. But one piece of the puzzle remained unresolved: Claire. Lucas had filed charges against her for her role in Matthew's abduction. Her desperation and poor decisions didn't excuse her actions. In court, her face was pale, her eyes downcast as the judge sentenced her to prison. Lucas didn't look at her as she was led away. She had betrayed her son in the worst possible way, and there was no forgiveness for that.